Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. We're playing a new game here. It's called Higher or Lower. I'm going to give the guys a fantasy point total, and we're going to see if they go higher or lower based on the CBS SportsLine projections. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but we're going to see how this goes. So I'm going to just throw out a number here, and they're going to see if it's higher or lower than the projections from SportsLine. All right, so we're going to start with Kyler Murray. The number is 20 fantasy points. So is SportsLine projecting Murray higher or lower in this week's matchup against the Panthers? Heath, you're up first.
So I'll 100% cheat here and use my own projections to answer. I'm going to say lower.
You're going to say lower than 20 fantasy points. Dan, is it higher or lower than 20 fantasy points from SportsLine?
Dan, no, just kidding. Higher. That's a throwback for some of the FFT listeners, but I'm going higher. SportsLine loves Murray in this matchup.
All right, so you're right. The SportsLine projection is 22.9. So Dan, what do you think about Murray, who we have a lot of concerns about taking on the Panthers this week?
I am with you on those concerns. Sure, the matchup is tilted in his favor. I think over time, probably SportsLine has this on a full season projection. But I think there's a lot of rushing in the red zone that they've had success with the Cardinals. There's also the opportunity for this game script to get way out of hand to the point where the Cardinals will just be running the football for most of the second half. So I don't see it happening.
All right, we'll see how this goes here for Kyler Murray. One game in his last four with over 20 fantasy points. So he is due to help fantasy managers who have stuck with him getting to the fantasy semifinals. All right, we got Jared Goff outdoors at Chicago, 22 fantasy points. Dan, higher or lower from SportsLine?
Lower.
I agree, lower.
You're both all right. It's 21.1, so just below 22 points. Heath, he has not been good outdoors. And the Bears, you can run on the Bears. We know they just lost David Montgomery, but how do we feel about Jared Goff in this matchup? An MVP candidate coming off a 5-touchdown game. Are you trusting him in this game?
I'm probably trusting both him and Kyler Murray, and I feel almost exactly the same about him and Kyler Murray. There's genuine reasons to have concern, and the upside is just too high on a week where we really don't like the quarterback position to sit these guys.
Yeah, I agree. He's falling in my rankings. I actually moved Bo Nix ahead of him. I found some numbers on Bo Nix coming off a loss, so I think he's going to hopefully be better than Jared Goff, but it's tough to say that any of these quarterbacks that you'll see in this range are safer than Jared Goff, but just outdoors, he has not been the same type of quarterback. All right, last quarterback we'll talk about here is Anthony Richardson. The number is 18 fantasy points. Heath, you're up first. Is it higher or lower?
I'm going to go higher. I've got him at 18.5.
All right, 18.5 for you. Dan?
I'll go higher as well.
All right, you're both right. It's 20.4. So obviously SportsLine likes Anthony Richardson. You like him a little bit. Dan, how do you feel about Richardson in this matchup against the Titans?
I definitely like him over the projection of 18 points. I think this is an interesting spot for him. He could have a lot of opportunities if Mason Rudolph struggles. So I like the opportunity for him to get going on the ground here as well. So, yeah, I like Richardson this week.
I thought he was going to have a huge game last week when he scored a rushing touchdown on the opening drive.
Yeah.
He's going to have to use his legs. He did get back-to-back games with over 40 fantasy points. It's 4 games in a row now where he's giving you at least 6 points with just his rushing totals. But he's got to cut down on the interceptions. And I think this is a great matchup if he's able to throw the ball with some success. And for what it's worth, the Titans are top 4 in most rushing touchdowns allowed to opposing quarterbacks. So maybe he can find the end zone on the ground once again. Let's talk about some running backs here. We'll start with Chuba Hubbard. So the number is 14 PPR points. Dan, are you going higher or lower based on SportsLine?
Higher.
Higher.
Higher. You're both right. They like him at 16.9 PPR points for this matchup against the Cardinals. Heath, we've seen up and down performances from Hubbard lately. This is going to be one of the better ones in this Week 16 game.
Yeah, I think like last week was extremely disappointing, but the fact that Jonathan Brooks is not there anymore means that we have 25 touch upside for Chuba Hubbard on a given week. That went wrong last week because the game script got out of hand. Arizona's not really shown the ability to put anybody away like that. So I think this game stays competitive, and Chuba Hubbard's a top 12 running back.
And you did see the combination of Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson have good numbers against the Cardinals. Obviously, the week before that, it was Zach Charbonnet going off against them. So I think Hubbard's a good number 2 running back. I think 16.9, though, might be a little bit too high. All right, this guy we have some concerns about. Breece Hall, the number is 16 PPR points. So, Dan, you going higher or lower based on SportsLine's projections?
Lower.
Way lower.
You're both wrong. SportsLine likes him just slightly higher at 16.3 PPR points. So, Dan, when you look at Breece Hall, playing time was way down last week. Didn't practice all last week. I hope he's going to be able to practice this week. How do you feel about him in this matchup against the Rams?
Yeah, I think that playing time is the major issue here. Will the touches be there? It's kind of anyone's guess at this point. I don't foresee. He didn't look fully healthy to me, and I think it'll be a similar split to last week, maybe a little bit more of an uptick. If he didn't have that touchdown at the end, we'd be talking about this whole situation a lot differently. So I think I don't think he's going to outproduce the projection.
Yeah, let's hopefully get a full week of practice for him, and again, similar for Tony Pollard as well. All right, let's see how you guys feel about this. Next one is actually my start of the week with Bucky Irving. So the number is going to be 15 PPR points. Heath, are we going higher or lower from what SportsLine thinks?
I'm going to go lower.
Lower for Bucky Irving than 15. Okay. Dan?
I think lower from the projection standpoint.
You're both right. They actually like Rachaad White better than Bucky Irving this week. So, Heath, when you look at Irving taking on the Cowboys, they did a great job against Chuba Hubbard. But this Bucs run offense has been great. Bucky Irving's coming off a 100-yard game. How's he going to do?
I love Bucky Irving as a rusher. In this particular situation, you've got to project it pretty close to a 50-50 split, I think, between him and Rachaad White. So it probably comes down to he will be more efficient. How does he do in the passing game, and how many touchdowns does he score? With one touchdown, I think he's a good number 2 running back. He's a mid number 2 in my projections.
All right, he's a top 12 guy for me. I'm excited that he's healthy. Last week was a little bit of a concern. I wonder how much that played into the playing time scenario. And Rachaad White was coming off a much better game 2 weeks ago. So hopefully Bucky Irving goes back to what he was doing prior to the back injury. I just like the setup against that Cowboys run defense. Let's talk about some wide receivers now. Zay Flowers. So the number is 14 PPR points. Dan, is that higher or lower for SportsLine?
I think SportsLine will be lower than that.
14?
14.
I will go lower.
You will go lower. And Dan, you said higher?
Lower.
You're both wrong. It's higher. It's 15.1 PPR points. So keep in mind, Stephen O does our projections. He's a Ravens fan. That may play into this a little bit. But how do you feel about Zay Flowers against the Steelers?
He's one of those guys, and it's almost like Anthony Richardson. I wonder how many times these guys ever finish within like 5 points of their projection. He's either going to be 15 points better or 15 points worse, it seems like. This game, the over-under is slowly creeping down, I think, as people remember how these Ravens-Steelers games often go. So I'm a little worried about Flowers getting into the end zone. He's a number 3 wide receiver, but I don't have a lot of confidence in this week.
It feels like he hasn't had a big game since that Broncos game when he had a tough matchup. So he's certainly due. And it's so funny with Lamar Jackson throwing 5 touchdowns, just having an unreal season that Zay Flowers' numbers have not popped. It's been more Rashad Bateman finding the end zone lately than Zay Flowers. DeVonta Smith, the number is 15 PPR points. Heath, higher or lower based on SportsLine's projections?
I'm going to go lower.
Dan?
I am going to go higher on this one.
All right, it's actually lower. It's 14.6 PPR points. So taking on Washington. So, Dan, you a little bit concerned about DeVonta Smith? Or are you excited about DeVonta Smith?
No, I'm excited about this. I loved his volume last week. I felt like the Eagles did some things in the passing game that I hadn't seen from them all season, concepts-wise. So maybe they can carry that over. A divisional game gets me a little bit scared from an offensive standpoint in general, but I do think the tempo will be up, and I think the Eagles are finding something in their passing game through DeVonta Smith. So I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, you wonder if they just decide they're going to do whatever they want to against Washington and throw the ball, run the ball, get Saquon Barkley going again, but hopefully Jalen Hurts and this volume stays to what it was last week, and that was certainly in DeVonta Smith's favor. All right, one more receiver, then we got a tight end. Jordan Addison, the number is 13 PPR points. Heath, higher or lower based on SportsLine's projections?
Higher.
Higher for Addison than 13. Dan?
I'll go higher as well on this one.
All right, you're both right. It's 14.1, taking on a Seahawks defense that, for the most part, has gotten much better recently against the pass, but did give up 2 touchdowns to Romeo Doubs last week. Addison had a pass interference in the end zone that may have ended up in a touchdown, but how do you feel about Addison taking on Seattle?
I actually like him more than DeVonta Smith. I like him more than Zay Flowers. I think he's a top 20 wide receiver. On a given week now, we almost don't know if Addison or Jefferson is going to be the better option in this pass offense. What I do know is I'm going to start both Addison and Jefferson every single week.
Yeah, it's just kind of gotten to that point, especially 2 of his last 4 games, over 30 PPR points for Addison. So he just needs to get back into the end zone, or maybe twice, or maybe 3 times, like we saw 2 weeks ago. All right, one tight end here, and then we'll answer a question of yours before we get to our next segment. Sam LaPorta, 12 PPR points. Dan, is the SportsLine projection higher or lower?
It's going up. I'm going higher.
Higher than 12? What about you, Heath?
I'm trying to think how much SportsLine factors in the last week and a half, last 2 weeks, because I'm going to go lower.
All right, Heath, you're right. It is lower. It's 10.9. I actually like LaPorta this week. Just a matter of can Goff get him going outdoors. How about you, Dan? What do you think?
I'm with you on that one. They've really changed their to the volume for LaPorta in the last couple of weeks, and I think it could be upticking toward the playoffs.
Has he scored a touchdown outdoors yet in the NFL? I don't believe Sam LaPorta scored a touchdown outdoors last year.
Interesting.
That is very interesting. I do think the Montgomery injury benefits him because that role in the passing game that Montgomery has sort of taken over a little bit. Clearly Gibbs will benefit. Maybe Craig Reynolds does also, but maybe it's 1 or 2 more catches for LaPorta, and maybe he does get his first touchdown outdoors. So that's more of, I think, a PPR versus a non-PPR thing. We'll see how the Bears are able to defend this Lions offense. Again, the elements could be the biggest difference. All right, let's answer one of your questions here, and then we'll take a break. This one comes to us from Vince. Full PPR, please pick 2. Derrick Henry, DeVonta Achane, Bucky Irving. So I'm sure we'll all agree on who the odd man out is here, but Heath, who are the 2 you're taking?
I am starting Derrick Henry and DeVonta Achane.
Dan?
Yeah, I can't go away from that.
I do have Irving ranked 1 spot ahead of Derrick Henry because I'm a little concerned about Henry against the Steelers, but let's just make it easy and go with Henry. 1 spot shouldn't sway you to go against the consensus. So Derrick Henry, DeVonta Achane are the 2 running backs that Vince should start. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, it's everybody's favorite game. It's start, bench, cut. I don't know if Dan's played that yet, so we'll see how he does taking on Heath, who's a veteran at who to start, who to sit, and who to kick off his roster. That's next on FFT.